The thug laughed, stepping closer to the tomb guard, thinking no one could stop him. His heavy boots scraped against the stone path, echoing louder than the respectful silence that blanketed the sacred ground. People in the crowd shifted uneasily, gasped, others let out nervous laughter, unsure if this was just a prank or something far more dangerous. The tomb guard did not flinch. He stood tall, motionless, his uniform perfect, his weapon at his side, eyes fixed forward with the same eternal stillness that had guarded the unknown soldier for decades. His discipline was a wall no storm could shake. The thug smirked. "What's the point of standing there all day? You're just a statue in a costume," he sneered, his voice cutting through the hush of the gathering. A few people tried to shush him, but he only grew bolder, enjoying the uneasy attention. He puffed out his chest and swaggered closer, as if daring the soldier to move. Whispers spread like fire through the watching crowd. Parents held their children's hands tighter. Veterans in the audience clenched their jaws, their eyes burning. With quiet fury, tourists lifted their phones higher, recording every second, sensing something unforgettable was about to happen, and still, the guard remained unbroken. His silence was not weakness, it was strength carved in stone, a strength that honored every fallen brother who had never come home. The thug took another step, his grin widening. He chuckled darkly, raising his voice for all to hear. "Say soldiers fight for freedom, but all I see is a man trapped in silence." His words dripped with disrespect, but the guard's face did not twitch, not even for a heartbeat. The tension became unbearable. Every breath in the crowd seemed suspended. In the summer air, the only sound was the distant flutter of a flag above and the steady beat of boots from another guard marching in the distance. For a moment, the thug's laughter filled the void. He believed he had won, that he had cracked the solemn atmosphere of the tomb with his mockery, but deep in the silence, something heavier than words began to press against him, a presence forged by discipline, sacrifice, and honor. They thought the guard would step aside. They thought discipline meant weakness. But honor does not move for disrespect. And what happened next would leave the thug bleeding. The world stunned, and the legacy of silence louder than any words. Long before that moment of confrontation, the tomb guard's story began in a world far removed from the silent marble steps of Arlington. His name was not announced to the world, because tomb guards are meant to be faceless symbols of honor. But behind the polished uniform and perfect stillness was a man who had lived through storms that most could not endure. He had been a soldier. Once, deployed in a war zone thousands of miles from home, he had carried a rifle through sandstorms, slept under skies pierced with gunfire, and lost a brother in arms in the heat of battle. That memory haunted him still. The final words, the dog tags clutched in bloodied hands, the weight of survival pressing harder than any enemy bullet. When he returned home, silence was the only language that made sense to him. It was that silence, the stillness of grief and respect, that eventually led him to the old guard, the elite unit entrusted with guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier. It was not just a duty, it was redemption. For him, every precise step and every minute of motionless standing was a vow. "I will not forget. I will never dishonor those who cannot speak for themselves." The tomb itself carried weight heavier than stone. It was not merely marble carved in honor, it was a shrine to sacrifice. Beneath its surface lay the remains of soldiers whose names the world would never know. They had no graves visited by family, no headstones with flowers. The tomb was their resting place, and the guard's silent vigil was their eternal companion. Tourists came by the thousands, some curious, some reverent. Veterans often visited with hats pressed to their chests. Tears they thought had dried long ago returning at the sight. Children were told to whisper, to watch, to understand that this was no ordinary monument, but not everyone respected it. The antagonist in this story, the thug who would soon cross a line no one thought possible, was the kind of man who thrived on arrogance. His name carried fear in local bars and neighborhoods. He had been arrested more than once, always escaping punishment through connections and intimidation. Some whispered he had ties to low-level politicians. Others said he worked as an enforcer for men who wanted power without getting their own hands dirty. For him, attention was currency. He loved being watched. He fed off the fear of others, and when he arrived at the tomb that day, he carried with him the same reckless pride that had shielded him in back alleys and smoky gambling dens. At first, no one noticed him, just another face in the crowd of tourists and locals. But those who knew him recognized the swagger, the way he spat casually near the stone steps, the mocking smirk that curled his lips. He was not here to honor the fallen, he was here to provoke. Reporters were present that day, too. A commemorative event had drawn more cameras than usual, and the thug noticed them almost immediately. He loved cameras. He loved the idea of going viral, of becoming the center of a spectacle. To him, rules were toys, respect was weakness, and the idea of a silent soldier refusing to react was too tempting to resist. The crowd that gathered did not yet know the storm brewing. They were tourists with hats shading their eyes, veterans, standing stiff with folded arms, children holding the hands of parents who whispered reminders to stay quiet. Some were there to take photos, others simply to witness a tradition that had lasted generations. To the guard, however, every crowd was the same. Faces blurred into one, time blurred into one. His life was measured not by hours, but by the precise 21 steps he took, the 21 seconds he paused, the 21 steps back again. It was a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat, and it carried with it the weight of every soldier who never returned home. That day, though something felt heavier, a presence in the air, he did not look for guards to not break focus, but he sensed it to shift in the silence. The murmur that rolled like thunder under the hush of respect. The thug had entered the sacred ground. The guard's training told him that no disrespect could break his stillness, but his soul, the part of him that still remembered a fallen brother's dying breath, tightened with unspoken fire. He would not react, not yet. Discipline was not about acting when anger flared, but about standing firm until duty demanded otherwise. To the crowd, it seemed almost impossible that one man's arrogance could outweigh centuries of tradition. Yet, as the thug inched closer, mocking, laughing, challenging the very essence of sacrifice, they began to understand the weight of what they were witnessing. This was not just a soldier standing watch. This was the clash of honor versus arrogance, silence versus mockery, sacrifice versus selfishness, and though no one knew it yet, the ground beneath the tomb was about to witness a moment that would be remembered far beyond that day, a moment where one guard's stillness would meet one thug's chaos, and the result would echo across the world. The silence of the tomb had always been sacred. Visitors came from across the country and around the world to witness it. The quiet footsteps, the perfectly measured turns, the rifle resting against the guard's shoulder. Every second was a reminder that honor never sleeps. But on this day, silence was about to be broken. The thug's laughter cut through the respectful hush like a jagged blade. At first it was just a chuckle, low and mocking, but it carried far in the still air. Heads turned toward him, frowns deepening, whispers rippling through the crowd. A few people exchanged uneasy looks, unsure if they should intervene. The guard did not move. His body was a statue, his face carved in discipline. To the thug, that stillness was an invitation. He clapped his hands suddenly, startling those closest to him. "Wake up, soldier," he barked. "You can't stand like a robot all day." Children shrank behind their parents. A veteran in the crowd muttered something under his breath, jaw tight, eyes locked on the intruder. Reporters, sensing the flicker of drama, angled their cameras toward the disturbance. Their lenses caught not just the thug's swagger, but the unshaken resolve of the guard. The contrast was striking. Arrogance against devotion, noise against silence. The thug grinned at the attention. He puffed his chest and marched in sloppy imitation of the guard's steps. "Look at me. 21 steps, 21 seconds. Is this what makes you a hero?" His boots scuffed against the stone in exaggerated stomps, mocking the perfection of the ritual. Gasps echoed. A woman whispered harshly, "He can't do that, it's sacred." A child asked softly, "Mom, why isn't the soldier stopping him?" The mother squeezed her hand, not sure how to answer. Through it all, the guard remained motionless. His eyes stayed fixed forward, his rifle steady. To those who did not understand, it looked like indifference. But those who knew the veterans, the families of the fallen, they recognized the weight of his restraint. His silence was not weakness. It was a shield of discipline, forged in fire and loss. The thug stepped closer to the guard's post, crossing a line most visitors wouldn't dare to approach. A low rumble of disapproval rolled through the crowd. Veterans clenched fists. Mothers pulled children back. One elderly man muttered, "If he takes one more step, he'll regret it." The thug sneered at the audience, reveling in their outrage. He spread his arms wide as if performing for a stage. "What's he gonna do, huh? He can't talk. He can't move. He's just a mannequin in a uniform." The words stung the air, but the guard's face never changed. Behind his calm exterior, though, the memory of fallen brothers stirred. Every insult hurled at him was an insult hurled at the nameless dead he represented. Yet he did not move. Tension grew unbearable. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the world itself was waiting for the inevitable clash. Reporters whispered to one another, debating if this was a stunt or a genuine threat. Their cameras zoomed closer, capturing the veins in the thug's neck, the shine of sweat on his forehead, the unwavering stillness of the guard's eyes. And then, the thug escalated. He leaned forward, cupping his hands around his mouth like a megaphone, and shouted directly into the guard's ear, "You're a joke." The words echoed off the marble, sharp and ugly. The crowd gasped in unison, the sacred silence shattered. Still the guard did not flinch. Anger flashed in the thug's eyes at being ignored. He craved reaction, fear, anger, anything. Instead, he was met with an immovable wall of honor. That silence cut deeper than any insult. It made him feel small, invisible. And that, more than anything, drove his rage higher. So he pushed further. He mimicked gunfire with his hands, laughing as he pointed them at the guard's chest. Bang, bang. Guess you're not so tough without your buddies, huh? Parents shielded their children's eyes. A veteran stepped forward, fists clenched, before his wife grabbed his arm and shook her head. They all knew the rule. The guard must not be interfered with, no matter what. The soldier's oath demanded he face it alone. The thug, encouraged by the crowd's restraint, strutted right up to the chain barrier that separated the spectators from the tomb's walkway. He placed one foot over it, deliberately crossing into forbidden ground. A ripple of outrage coursed through the onlookers. No, he can't. One man whispered. The guard's jaw tightened ever so slightly, a motion so small it would be missed by most. But to the trained eye, it was the shift of a storm behind calm skies. The thug laughed louder, pointing at the guard's rifle. "This for, huh? You're not even allowed to use it. You're just a prop." A child began to cry softly, unsettled by the tension. His father knelt down, whispering, "Watch, son. Watch closely, you're about to see what honor means." Reporters' cameras clicked furiously, every second recorded, every word captured. The video would soon spread across the internet, but in that moment, no one thought about going viral. They thought about the sacred ground beneath their feet, and the insult clawing at its dignity. The thug took his boldest step yet. He crossed fully over the barrier, standing just inches from the guard. The crowd held its collective breath. Time itself seemed to freeze, and still the guard remained silent. It was a silence that screamed louder than any voice. A silence that said, "This tomb is greater than you. This honor is older than your arrogance. This stillness is stronger than your noise." The thug smirked, leaning close, his words dripping with scorn. "What are you gonna do, soldier boy?" "Nothing. That's what I thought." The crowd's nerves snapped like taut strings. Some shouted for security, others begged the thug to stop. A veteran muttered, "Lord, give me strength not to step in," but the guard did not need their help. He had been trained for this moment. He had been waiting, not for anger to decide, but for duty to demand. And though the crowd didn't yet realize it, the thug had just stepped into a storm he could never escape. Escalation was complete. The line had been crossed. And the next move would not belong to arrogance, but to honor. The crowd held its breath as the thug stood inches from the tomb guard. He had crossed the barrier, shattered the silence, and mocked everything sacred. Yet still, the guard stood unbroken. But arrogance always pushes further. The thug leaned in, close, his hot breath brushing against the guard's cheek. "You hear me, soldier? You're nothing but a wind-up toy." His words dripped with venom, meant not only to provoke but to humiliate. When the guard gave no response, the thug's frustration boiled over. He reached out suddenly, his hand clamping down on the guard's shoulder. Gasps erupted across the crowd. Security tensed. Parents shielded children's eyes. Veterans clenched their fists. Touching a tomb guard was unthinkable. The thug smirked. At the ripple of shock, "See, he's not allowed to do anything. He's just a mannequin." But in that moment, something changed. The guard's body, still as stone for so long, moved with a precision that startled the eye. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward, twisting his body just enough to break the thug's grip. His hand came up like steel, and with a perfectly controlled strike, he delivered a single punch, clean, sharp, devastating. The sound echoed through the marble air. It wasn't just a punch, it was the crack of bone meeting discipline. The thug's head snapped back, and the sickening crunch of shattering teeth followed. Blood sprayed across the stone path as the man collapsed to the ground, his arrogance stripped away in an instant. The crowd gasped, some covering their mouths, others frozen in stunned silence. A child whimpered before being pulled close by his mother. Veterans stood straighter, eyes burning with pride. Cameras clicked and rolled, capturing every millisecond of the unthinkable scene. For the first time all day, the silence wasn't broken by mockery, it was broken by awe. The thug writhed on the ground, clutching his mouth, blood pouring between his fingers. His muffled groans filled the air where laughter once lived. His swagger was gone. His strength was gone. His arrogance lay shattered alongside his teeth. And the guard, he did not gloat. He did not shout. He did not move beyond what duty required. He stepped back into position, heels clicking sharply against the stone, his rifle once again resting at his side. His expression returned to stillness, eyes fixed forward as if nothing had happened. The discipline was absolute. Security rushed in, surrounding the fallen thug. One officer barked orders into his radio. Another knelt, snapping handcuffs around the man's wrists. Blood stained the sacred walkway, but the tomb guard's unshaken stance reminded everyone present that honor itself had not been touched. The crowd remained silent, an almost reverent silence, heavy with meaning. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of respect. A little boy tugged on his father's sleeve, whispering, "Daddy." He didn't even get mad. He just did it. The father nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the guard. "That's what discipline looks like, son. That's what it means to protect something greater than yourself." Nearby, a veteran raised his trembling hand to his temple in salute, tears sliding silently down his weathered face. Reporters whispered, in disbelief, their cameras capturing the aftermath. The footage would soon ignite the internet, sparking debates, praise, and outrage. But in that moment, the raw truth was undeniable. The guard had acted not out of anger, but out of duty. The thug had crossed the final line, and honor had answered. Atmosphere thickened, as if time itself paused to absorb what had just happened. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the thug's groaning breath, broken by the occasional metallic click of handcuffs tightening. Then, slowly, a ripple of reaction began to spread. It wasn't cheers, it wasn't applause, it was something deeper, a murmur of respect, of understanding, of awe. One by one, heads bowed, veterans saluted, parents whispered to their children. The crowd knew they had witnessed something unforgettable. The thug was dragged away, blood trailing faintly across the stone. His arrogance, once towering, now looked pitiful. And yet the guard remained untouched, untouched by rage, untouched by pride, untouched by anything but the weight of his oath. He resumed his 21 steps, 1, 2, 3, each click of his boots against the marble rang like thunder in the hearts of the crowd. His motion was smooth, flawless, unshaken by the chaos that had erupted moments before. It was as if the tomb itself had chosen to remind the world, honor does not move for disrespect. A woman in the crowd whispered softly, almost like a prayer. He didn't just punch a man. He defended silence. He defended all of them. She nodded toward the marble stone of the tomb where the unknown rested. The people understood. This was not about violence. This was about boundaries, about the sacred weight of tradition, about the discipline that stood eternal, unmoved by arrogance, unmoved by mockery, unmoved by anything less than honor itself. The thug had wanted a spectacle. He had gotten one, but not the kind he had imagined. His name would be remembered not as the man who mocked the guard, but as the man who was silenced by honor with a single strike. And the guard, he would be remembered not for the punch, but for the stillness that followed. The thug lay crumpled on the stone, blood spilling between his fingers as he groaned in disbelief. His arrogance had collapsed as suddenly as his body. Teeth scattered on the marble glistened under the sunlight, silent testimony to the price of disrespect. The crowd stood frozen. 4 seconds that felt like hours. No one spoke. No one moved. Parents shielded their children. Veterans locked their jaws. And reporters struggled to decide whether to lower their cameras out of respect or keep filming history in the making. Security officers surged forward, their boots pounding against the stone. 2 men grabbed the thug by his arms, hauling him upright as he staggered, spitting blood, his once defiant eyes now swollen with humiliation. He mumbled something unintelligible, but the words dissolved into gurgling pain. The guard, meanwhile, stood as if nothing had happened. He resumed his measured pace. 21 steps forward, 21 seconds paused, 21 steps back again. The ritual never faltered. Not even chaos could bend his discipline. That, more than the punch, struck the crowd hardest. A boy whispered to his mother. He just went back to walking. His mother nodded, holding him close, because his duty is stronger than his anger. Reporters leaned toward each other, murmuring about how this footage would sweep across every news channel, every social feed, every debate table, but even they lowered their voices, their tones tinged with awe. The colonel in charge of the guard detail arrived, his chest swelling with both tension and pride. He scanned the scene, blood on the stone, security restraining the thug, the crowd's wide eyes, and finally turned to the soldier. The guard didn't acknowledge him, didn't break focus, didn't need to. His silence was its own report. Colonel raised a hand slowly, and with a sharp motion, delivered a salute. It was not just for the guard before him, but for every soldier the man represented. Every life honored by his stillness. In the crowd, the veterans responded instinctively. Dozens of hands rose in solemn salute, tears cutting paths down weathered cheeks. They knew discipline when they saw it. They knew sacrifice when they felt it. And in that moment, they saw both embodied in the silent sentinel before them. The thug struggled against the officers holding him, blood dripping down his chin, his muffled curses barely carried beyond the chain line, his voice broken, powerless. For years, his strength had been his intimidation, his ability to provoke fear. Now, fear had abandoned him. He was not feared, he was pitied, dragged down the steps. He looked smaller than ever before. His swagger was gone, crushed under the weight of the very silence he had mocked. The cameras followed him, but they lingered longer on the guard. There was something magnetic in that stillness. The man had struck once, decisive, necessary, final, and then returned to his post as though nothing had changed. That was what captivated the world. The scene itself had transformed. Minutes earlier, tension had hung heavy, like storm clouds, ready to break now. The air carried reverence. People who had come expecting a tourist moment were suddenly part of a legend. They didn't just watch a soldier at a monument, they witnessed honor defend itself. The child who had asked earlier, "Why doesn't the soldier stop him?" whispered again. This time, the words trembled with awe. "He's a hero, isn't he?" His father's voice cracked as he replied, "Yes, the kind we rarely see anymore." The silence returned, but it was no longer fragile. It was no longer at risk of being broken by laughter or arrogance. It was strong now, fortified by the moment everyone had witnessed. The tomb itself seemed to breathe deeper, its eternal watch reaffirmed. The colonel's salute lowered, but his eyes lingered. He would later write a report, face inquiries, answer questions, but in his heart, he knew what the world had just seen. This was not an act of violence. It was an act of preservation of respect, of discipline, of a legacy that could not be mocked without consequence. The guard's boots clicked against the marble, each sound ringing louder than the thug's earlier jeers. Every step now carried the weight of finality, like punctuation marks on a story no one would forget. When the thug was finally dragged out of sight, the crowd exhaled as one. Some wiped tears, others placed hands over their hearts. No one cheered, no one clapped. The moment was too sacred for noise. Instead, they simply stood in the presence of a man who had defended silence with silence, who had answered disrespect with discipline. And as the guard resumed his eternal watch, the cameras captured what would become the viral image replayed across the world, the bloodied thug disappearing into custody, and behind him, the unshaken sentinel, marching his 21 steps in unbroken rhythm. That image would outlive the day. It would outlive the thug's shame. It would remind millions that honor does not need to shout, and that stillness can be stronger than any force. The climax wasn't the punch itself, it was the silence that followed. A silence that roared louder than any victory cry. The marble stones gleamed under the late afternoon sun, as if the tomb itself had absorbed the gravity of what had just occurred. The thug was gone, dragged into custody with blood staining his shirt, his arrogance stripped bare. But the silence he had tried to shatter had returned stronger, deeper, unbreakable. The guard marched 21 steps forward, halt 21 seconds of stillness, turn 21 steps back again. Not a flicker of expression, not a hint of pride or anger. To the crowd, it was almost unbelievable. The same ritual continued as if nothing had happened, as though the marble had swallowed chaos whole. But within the crowd, something had changed forever. Parents whispered to their children, explaining the meaning of what they had just seen. A boy clutched a tiny toy soldier in his fist and whispered to his mother, "I want to be like him." She squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. Veterans stood straighter, some saluting once more, others pressing trembling hands to their hearts. They knew what it meant to fight battles inside as well as out. The colonel remained at the edge, his hands still tingling from the salute he had given moments earlier. He knew he would face paperwork, questioning, perhaps even controversy. But that was for tomorrow. Today he had witnessed something rare, a soldier who embodied not just discipline, but reverence. He knew history had been made. Reporters began filing hurried notes, their voices hushed but excited. They knew the footage would ignite the world. Debates about honor, about rules, about whether silence could be stronger than violence. But none of their words could fully capture the weight of the moment they had witnessed with their own eyes. And still, the guard marched. The people lingered long after the ceremony should have ended. No one wanted to be the first to leave. They felt as if walking away too soon would cheapen the gravity of what had unfolded. Instead, they stayed, heads bowed, hearts heavy with respect. Somewhere in the crowd, a little girl tugged her father's sleeve. "Daddy, why didn't he smile?" after the father knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Because it wasn't about winning. It was about protecting." She frowned softly, but her young mind understood enough to nod. The guard's mind, though hidden behind an unbroken mask, was far from empty. He felt the dog tag pressing against his chest beneath the fabric of his uniform, the dog tag of his fallen brother in arms. He carried it every day, a reminder of why he stood, why he never broke. In his mind's eye, he saw his friend smile, heard the final words whispered in the dust of battle. He had promised then that he would never forget, that he would honor him not with noise, but with silence that could not be shaken. Today, that vow had been tested and upheld. He did not relish the strike he had delivered. It was not pride that filled his chest, but solemnity. He knew the world would replay the punch endlessly, dissecting it, glorifying it, turning it into a spectacle. But for him, it was never about the punch. It was about the silence that came after. As the sun lowered, shadows stretching long across the marble, the colonel stepped forward once more. He paused, then offered the smallest of gestures, a nod. Nothing more needed to be said. Between soldiers, respect often lived best in silence. The guard's eyes never shifted, his body never broke form, but inside, a quiet understanding passed between them. At the far edge of the crowd, a boy whispered a single word, almost too soft to hear. "Hero." That word rippled through the silence like a pebble cast into still water. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't announced, it was whispered, but in its quietness, it carried more power than applause. For hours afterward, the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving the tomb once more in its eternal stillness. But those who had been there would never forget. They would tell their children, their grandchildren, they had seen a moment when arrogance met discipline, when noise met silence and silence had prevailed. The guard, alone once more in his vigil, lowered his eyes for a fraction of a second. In that private gesture, unseen by most, he honored his fallen friend. The dog tag beneath his uniform pressed against his chest like a heartbeat. Then he raised his head again, eyes forward, unbroken. Tomorrow, and the day after, and every day beyond, the watch would continue, because honor does not rest. And as the last light of day faded from the marble, the tomb stood as it always had, eternal, unshaken, and guarded not just by soldiers, but by silence itself. They say silence is empty, that it is fragile, that it bends before the roar of arrogance. But today proved the opposite. Silence can be heavier than thunder, sharper than any sword, more unshakable than stone. The thug wanted chaos. He wanted laughter, disruption, and attention. For a brief moment, he thought he had one. He mistook stillness for weakness, tradition for routine, and respect for passivity. But when he crossed the line, the truth struck harder than any fist ever could. Discipline is not silence, it is power restrained. The crowd saw it, the world felt it, and those who will watch the footage in years to come will understand this was not about a single punch. It was about what came before, and what endured after. Lagarde never boasted, he never smirked, he never even acknowledged victory, because it wasn't about winning, it was about preserving the honor of the fallen, preserving the dignity of a place where thousands of nameless heroes rest, preserving the idea that respect is not negotiable. Think about it. World where everyone wants to be loud, to shout, to dominate every room they enter. There stood one man who said nothing and yet spoke more powerfully than anyone else could. His silence silenced arrogance, his stillness shattered ego, his discipline humbled pride. That is the kind of strength we forget exists. A strength not built on shouting, not fueled by rage, but forged in sacrifice, patience, and unwavering purpose. The boy who whispered hero was not wrong, but this was not the kind of hero we see in movies or comic books. This was the quiet kind of hero, the one who stands guard in the rain, in the snow, in the blazing sun, unseen and unthanked. The one who shoulders the weight of history so that the rest of us can walk freely. And maybe that's the lesson here. We may never wear that uniform, we may never march those 21 steps, but we can carry a piece of that honor into our own lives. We can be still when provoked, we can be respectful when mocked, we can stand firm when the world tries to shake us, because true strength isn't in how loudly we shout back. True strength is in refusing to bow when it matters most. So remember this moment, remember the silence that defeated arrogance. Remember the guard who stood still when mocked and struck only when duty demanded it. And remember that honor is not weakness, it is unbreakable. If this story moved you, if you believe respect is worth protecting, share it, pass it on. Remind others that tradition matters, that sacrifice matters, that silence can be stronger than chaos. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, stories of discipline, courage, and the hidden heroes among us, because these are not just tales of the past, they are reminders for the future. And when you walk away today, carry this thought with you: stillness is not silence, stillness is strength. And strength, when rooted in honor, will always outlast arrogance.